Happy Friday, Casmaz! We have spent a lot of time this week talking about different ways to represent decimals, whether it's using bar models, base 10 blocks, place value discs. You have a lot of tools in your toolbox to help you really represent and visualize decimal place value. So today we're going to use all of those skills and strategies that you've been learning to compare decimals. So our objective for today is I can compare decimals to the hundredths place. Now remember, when we're comparing something, we're trying to figure out, is one greater than the other? Is it less than the other? Or is it equal to the number? So let's go ahead and take a look at a quick video to get our brain thinking about comparing decimals.
Comparing decimals. Decimal numbers are combinations of whole numbers and numbers between whole numbers. You'll see decimals in money values and in measurements, like the volume of your favorite drinks and runners' sprint times. To compare the value of decimal numbers, you can use a place value chart. This chart has columns for the tens, ones, tenths, hundredths, and thousandths places. Let's compare the sprint times of 3 track team runners in the 100-meter dash. The smallest value is the fastest time. The largest value is the slowest time. In the chart, align the decimal points of the numbers you're comparing. Then write the value of each digit in the correct column of the chart. Now compare the digits in each place. Here, we start with the tens place. Moving from left to right, find the first place where the values are different, which is the hundredths place. So the smallest number in this set is 12 and 109 thousandths. Keep moving to the right to compare the values of the remaining numbers. The next place where we see a difference is the thousandths column. The 0 in the thousandths place is the lowest value, so 12 and 120 thousandths is the lower number. So the numbers from least to greatest are 12 and 109 thousandths, 12 and 120 thousandths, and 12 and 122 thousandths. This means the fastest runner completed the 100-meter dash in 12 and 109 thousandths seconds. For more practice comparing decimals, open your Scholastic magazine.
All right, so today we are going to practice 3 different strategies for comparing decimals. We're going to use bar models, base 10 blocks, and place value discs. So the first example we have here is we're looking at these 2 decimals, 0 and 4 tenths and 0 and 2 tenths. And for this example, we're going to use bar models to compare them and figure out if 0 and 4 tenths is greater or less than 0 and 2 tenths. So I'm going to just go ahead and copy these into the boxes so we can label them. You can see which one's which. So here you see I have a bar model. It's split up into 10 equal parts, and I'm going to shade in 0 and 4 tenths on this bar model. And then in this one, same thing, I have a bar model split into 10 equal parts. This time I'm going to shade in 0 and 2 tenths. So let's look at this. Is 0 and 4 tenths greater than or less than 0 and 2 tenths? Well, I see that 0 and 4 tenths has more of the bar model shaded in than 0 and 2 tenths. So that tells me that 0 and 4 tenths is greater than 0 and 2 tenths. So I just slid that greater than symbol in between those 2 numbers. All right. For the next one, I'm actually going to ask you to take out your bar models from your decimal toolkit, and you're going to do the same thing that I just modeled in this example. So in a moment, you can pause the video. I would like for you to label one of your bar models 0 and 6 tenths, and then the second bar model 0 and 9 tenths. Then go ahead and shade in your bar models to show each decimal number and decide, is 0 and 6 tenths greater than or less than 0 and 9/10. So go ahead and pause the video, and when you come back, we'll check it together. All right, I've gone ahead and shaded in my bar models. I shaded in 6/10 on this first bar model for 0 and 6/10, and then 9 of the tenths on this bar model for 0 and 9/10. And I can see that 0 and 6/10 has less of the bar model shaded in. So that tells me that 0 and 6/10 is less than 0 and 9/10. Remember, the alligator mouth wants to be open to the bigger number. All right. Now we're going to use a different strategy to compare these decimals 0 and 3/10 and 0 and 7/10. So we're going to go ahead and use base 10 blocks to do this. So I have a place value chart here. My first number was 0 and 3/10. So I'm going to go ahead and put that into the place value chart, 0 and 3/10. I didn't put anything in the hundreds column because we don't have anything in that decimal number that's to the hundredths. And then the second number was 0 and 7/10. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in this second part of the chart. All right, now we're going to use the base 10 blocks to build these two decimals and then compare to see which one is greater. All right, so we don't have any ones in either of the numbers, so we don't need to bring a flat over. In this number, we have 3/10. I'm going to go ahead and slide over 1, 2, 3/10. And down here, the digit tells us we have 7, so we need 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. And then there were no hundredths. So looking at these base 10 blocks, we can see that 0 and 3/10 is less than 0 and 7/10 because it has less longs, less sticks in the tenths place. So I can go back in and use my less than symbol to show that 0 and 3/10 is less than 0 and 7/10. All right, let's take a look at another one. Here we have 0 and 5/100ths compared to 0 and 6/10. And again, we're going to use base 10 blocks to compare these two decimal numbers. So first I'm going to go ahead and open up my place value chart and put in my decimal numbers. So the first was 0 and 5/100ths, and the second number was 0 and 6/10. All right, let's go ahead and build these two decimals with these base 10 blocks. Neither one has a ones place, so I don't need to pull over any flats. Here I have 0 in this tenths place, but then I have 6 in the tenths place for this. I'm going to pull over 6 longs into this column. 6. And then over here, in the hundredths column, this number has 5/100ths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then this number doesn't have any hundredths. So taking a look at the base 10 blocks, what can we say about 0 and 5/100ths compared to 0 and 6/10? Yes, 0 and 5/100ths is much smaller than 0 and 6/10. I'm going to go ahead and drag that less than symbol to show that 0 and 5/100ths is less than 0 and 6/10. All right. Okay, for this one, I'm going to actually have you do the work with the base 10 blocks. So we're going to compare 0 and 23/100ths to 0 and 12/100ths. In a moment, I'd like you to pause the video, go ahead and build these two decimal numbers, and then think about whether 0 and 23/100ths is greater than or less than 0 and 12/100ths. All right, we'll check together in a moment. Go ahead. Okay, so how'd you do? Let's check it together. I've gone ahead and built the two decimal numbers. Here's my 0 and 23/100ths, and then my 0 and 12/100ths. And you can see that we're always moving from left to right to think about which one is larger. So they both have 0 ones. Okay. Then we look at the tenths place. I see that this number has 2 in the tenths place, and this has only 1 in the tenths place. So that tells me that 0 and 23 hundredths is greater than 0 and 12 hundredths. Even though this number has more hundredths than this number, we're still working from left to right. And this tenths place, that's the place that tells us that the top number is larger or greater than the bottom number. So I can go ahead and drag in my greater than symbol to show that 0 and 23 hundredths is greater than 0 and 12 hundredths. All right. This time we're going to use place value discs to compare 0 and 53 hundredths to 0 and 81 hundredths. I'm using a similar place value chart, but this time instead of base 10 blocks, I have some place value discs. And you can just do this with any manipulatives, bingo chips, coins, Legos, whatever you have around the house, pieces of macaroni, doesn't matter. All right, so our first number was 0 and 53 hundredths, and we're comparing that to 0 and 81 hundredths. Okay, so neither of them have digits in the ones place. We're going to move over to the tenths. This one has 5, so we're going to pull over 5 tenths discs. You know, these purple discs on my screen are tenths because they're labeled 0 and 1/10. That's what their value is. And then this one has 8 tenths. And then the top number has 3 hundredths, so we'll go ahead and put 3 discs in the hundredths place. And this bottom one has 1 in the hundredths place. All right, so remember we start from left and then move to the right to see which one is greater. Neither of them have any digits or any discs in the ones place, so we're going to move to the tenths place. I see that there are 5 discs in the tenths place here on top, but there are 8 discs in the tenths place on the bottom number. So I can stop and say, I already know that 0 and 53 hundredths is less than 0 and 81 hundredths. And my clue is that this digit 8 in the tenths place is greater than this digit 5 in the tenths place. I could keep looking and I see that there are 3 hundredths in this number and 1 hundredth in this number. Even though this one has more in the hundredths place than this bottom number, it's still that clue in the tenths place tells me that 0 and 81 hundredths is greater than 0 and 53 hundredths because there's more discs in the tenths place on the bottom than there are on the top. So I can go ahead and drag in my less than symbol to show that 0 and 53 hundredths is less than 0 and 81 hundredths. All right, let's take a look at this one here. 1 and 2 tenths compared to 0 and 15 hundredths. I would like for you to pause the video and go ahead and use your little manipulatives, whatever you have, to build these 2 decimal numbers and decide whether or not 1 and 2 tenths is greater than or less than 0 and 15 hundredths. And then we'll come back and check together. Go for it. All right, I went ahead and built these 2 decimal numbers with my place value discs. I have 1 and 2 tenths on the top, 0 and 15 hundredths on the bottom. So go ahead and take a look at what you created and compare it to mine. Remember, when we're comparing decimals, we always work from left to right. And I'm looking right here in this ones column, and I'm noticing that this decimal on the top has 1 disc in the ones place, but this decimal on the bottom has no discs in the ones place. That already tells me right away that 1 and 2 tenths is greater than 0 and 15 hundredths because of this ones place. I don't have to go any further to compare them because I can tell already based on this first place value. I'm going to go ahead and drag this greater than symbol in to show that 1 and 2 tenths is greater than 0 and 15 hundredths. All right, so the last thing I want to look at here, you might already be starting to notice a strategy you could use to compare decimal numbers without even using manipulatives. Manipulatives are awesome and great. You know I love them and we use them all the time, but you might be able to start thinking about how you can compare decimals without using manipulatives. So let's take a look at 0 and 24 hundredths and compare it to 0 and 35 hundredths. I'm going to use the place value chart to compare these two numbers. So the first was 0 and 24 hundredths, so I'll put that up here on top. And then the second was 0 and 35 hundredths. Okay, so remember, when we're comparing numbers, we move from left to right. So I'm looking in the ones place and I notice that they both have the digit 0. So that tells me that they're equal in the ones place. I'm going to move over to the tenths place. This top number has a digit 2 and this bottom number has a digit 3. So this gives me some clues about which number is greater. I know that this digit 3 is greater than the digit 2. So that tells me the decimal number 0 and 35 hundredths is greater than 0 and 24 hundredths. I don't need to go any further. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that greater than symbol in right there. All right. I would like for you on your own to try this last one without manipulatives. See if you can do it. Go ahead and use your place value chart. Put in this number 0 and 46 hundredths, and then this number 0 and 6 tenths, and then go ahead from left to right comparing the digits to see if you can figure out which one is greater. Go ahead and pause the video, try that on your own, and then we'll check it together. All right, welcome back. Here is my place value chart. I've put in the two decimal numbers we're comparing into the place value chart. And beginning on the left, they both have 0 in the ones place. So we're going to move over to the tenths place. This top number has a digit 4 in the tenths place, while the bottom number has a digit 6 in the tenths place. So we can stop here because we already can tell that 6 is greater than 4. So 0 and 6 tenths is the larger decimal. If I'm looking at this number sentence, we now know, because this number has a digit 4 in the tenths place, and this one has a 6 in the tenths place, that 0 and 46 hundredths is less than 0 and 6 tenths. All right, so now it's your turn. Today, you're going to choose an activity that you can do to practice comparing decimals. And maybe you want to give the bar model strategy a try, or maybe you want to try doing the base 10 blocks or the place value discs. Maybe you want to do all of them depending on the question, doesn't matter. Or maybe you're ready to go ahead and use your place value chart and then compare the digits to determine which decimal number is greater or less. Totally up to you, whatever you're feeling comfortable with. If you need some help, come join us at an extra help session and we'd be happy to help you out. All right. Have a great weekend and we'll see you next week. Bye.